6 million, Russia, 6 million, even India, the global capital of outsourcing, will only have 1 million talent surplus. And nations like Nigeria, Egypt, generally the African continent, we are in a position to really take advantage of the digital revolution in the world. For instance, Nigeria, there are more English speakers in Nigeria than in India. Our proximity to Europe is an added advantage, and most importantly, even our diction. I will tell you a story of a young lady in Abuja. Her name is Mrs. Amal Hassan. She runs a digital lab, a digital outsourcing hub. This is a lady who has employed 7,000 Nigerians. This is just a tip of the iceberg. Opportunities abound in the outsourcing industry and in so many other developing frontiers. India is expected to generate $100 billion from outsourcing alone in this 2024. Yes, we are an oil giant, but how much did we ever generate from oil? The highest we had ever generated as an oil-producing nation was 35 billion in 2011. So I believe that Africa holds the promise, and I want to use this platform to seek for partnership. For me, I don't subscribe to the idea of begging, no. We can carry our poverty with dignity.
Sure.
We can seek for partnership, for friendship, for genuine relationship that would be mutually beneficial to the investors as well as to the African people.
Sure. I agree with you, and Mary, I'm going to come to you in just a short while. I agree with you just in terms of the fact that, I mean, we don't have to beg, just given the fact that it can be a mutually beneficial exchange. If you look at the fact that we do house some of the most important assets that the world needs right now, from the minerals that we mine to power all forms of transitions, energy transitions, green transitions, to the workforce that you did mention, although perhaps a caveat can be placed as to whether the workforce is skilled to the same degree as in other parts of the world and is competitive as well to the same degree. That's perhaps something that we can park on the side. So we've got a lot of things going for us, essentially so. And it can be a mutually beneficial exchange. But what we have seen is we've seen a lot of money going away from us as well, in terms of the continent. Some money has been patient enough to actually just sit on the fence and wait and see for certain things to come right. Infrastructure, some of the challenges there, but perhaps even governance and concerns around how things are run and managed. Perhaps the biggest concern there. So in this exchange that you seek, this partnership exchange, sir, what is your message to some of the investors from outside the continent who might be interested in what you're saying right now? The numbers that you've presented do look appealing, but they do, of course, still have their concerns.
Well, the concerns about leadership is quite germane, because as Chinua Achebe, one of Nigeria's foremost novelists, said, the problem of Africa is purely that of leadership. But there is a sea change in the quality of leadership prevailing in Africa now than it was 20, 30 years ago when the Mobutu Sese Sekos of this world were holding sway. For instance, in my country, we have a leader who is clearly poised to determine and redefine the quality of modern leadership. In the past 6 months since we assumed the mantle of leadership, he had taken far-sighted decisions, including the biggest elephant in the room, the withdrawal of oil fuel subsidy that was an albatross around the neck of successive Nigerian governments, the reform of the foreign exchange regime where we had multiple exchange rates, and beyond that, the setting up of a fiscal reform committee so that we can have a single line of taxation. There's a lot still that needs to be done, but be rest assured that in terms of leadership, there is a sea change in our fortunes now and in the past. At the risk of embarrassing him, Seated here is our Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy. He's a humble and self-effacing gentleman, living in the same house for the past 30 years, which is quite unlike an African, pomposity and our preference for big things. He has been living in that house. Yes, in the same house, just a 3-bedroom house for the past 30 years.
Okay. If this is a mansion that was built 30 years ago and has been renovated, then perhaps.
And look at our Minister of Communications. He's a square peg in a square hole. He's a young man, apolitical. In fact, he was even critical of our candidature. But when my boss, when he sees people with contrarian views but have the capacity for value addition, he is in that digital ecosystem. He runs a lab, a digital lab in Lagos. He picked him. He's a young man. He's in his 30s, and gave him the mantle of leadership to drive the process of change in the communications industry. On infrastructure, certainly we have huge infrastructural deficit. But the word for crisis in the Chinese language is wei, des. Wei stands for danger and des for opportunity. Yes, those crises, those challenges also provide us with the opportunities to reposition our nations in terms of infrastructure. And this is why the investors can easily come in, especially with the enabling environment created by the present administration. I don't want to confine myself to Nigeria alone. Go to Ghana, go to South Africa, go to Egypt, go to Ethiopia, where Abiy Hassan is doing wonderfully well. So Africa is beckoning on the wall for genuine partnership that will really work for the mutual benefit of all of us.
Okay, okay. And so Mary, comes in you as the largest lender on the continent by market value. So the decisions that you make are not emotional ones. It can't be like me because of passion and love for a continent. It needs to be decisions that are based on risk-weighted returns, as it were. And so just reflecting on what some of the colleagues have shared, but also as First Rand, what you're thinking and how you view the opportunity that is Africa right now. Just spell out that investment case for us.
Thank you, Fifi. It's been very encouraging listening to the comments from the Vice President from Nigeria. As First Rand, we have an investment and a business in Nigeria. So I think all the reforms that we've seen over the last 7 months have been encouraging. And I guess, as you say, that if when Nigeria does well, the continent does well. So we certainly also sit with an appreciation and would like to encourage you to see through all the structural reforms that have taken place over the last while. And Fifi, I guess when we have a discussion like this, you started off and spoke about this long-held promise around the continent, given the demographics, given all the resources that the continent has, and actually what's been delivered. But I think when one looks at the next 10 years, I certainly am encouraged that there are a lot of structural reforms that have been necessary over the last while that have not received as much attention as one can say they're receiving now, including, I guess, the development as well in a very big economy like Nigeria. You look at some of the structural reforms that are underway in South Africa. I mean, we're still one of the most industrialized countries on the continent, but we know the impacts of not having energy and what that has done to our economy. So, there is a lot that one can look at and be encouraged around what the next 10 years will bring. And I think Mr. Minette just actually outlined a very critical action plan and developments that have taken place on an instrument that is really required. I mean, one way to lift the growth of any economy is really trade. And I guess the barriers to trade,
Sure.
Yeah, the barriers to trade have really been well captured, and actually and the opportunity that sits behind countries where we take away all those barriers. I mean, I guess if we just even look at regional trade, if we got that right, and I guess we enabled the opportunities that come about from regional trade, that already will be significant, let alone the continent. So I think just to the World Bank, encouragement to please keep ongoing with the reforms, and it's also just hearing the results of also what's taken place. I think it's quite significant. When we look at the numbers of how much the frictional cost of trade is on the continent, because as you said, people need to access currencies that they don't trade in. I think it's about $5 billion a year, which I think which actually could go back into the economies. And I mean, you made the point around lending. So some of the challenges that we see, and where as banks we would like to leverage more of our balance sheet for productive capital formation. I know sometimes we get a lot of pressure for not lending, but I mean, retail lending is important if it enables a person to own a house and live in it for 3 decades. But for purpose of consumption, that's not particularly helpful. But I guess what we should really be, what we need to do with the deposits that our depositors entrust us with is convert that for productive capital formation. So we need to make sure that money is going into lending businesses that are going to create jobs, businesses that are going to make sure that we've got the infrastructure required to generate the economic capital. So that's really where we would like to play. But when the policies and the regulations are not enabling, I think that becomes really a very big constraint. And I mean, I think just to go back to agriculture, so if you look at a lot of our economies, I mean, if you compare them globally, they are small, but they're quite complex. I mean, South Africa itself is also quite complex. And how that plays out when you look at small and emerging enterprises that are coming through that require finance is that there's a gap between there's a perception gap in terms of the risks that the businesses undertake and the actual risks. So the perception of risk is quite different. And I think, leveraging off data, leveraging off, I think a lot of the advances that have happened in technology, we're able to look at a small business and see that it's actually an important part of an ecosystem or a value chain. So in agriculture, for instance, we can look at a milk bottle supplier, and instead of looking at the balance sheet of just that supplier, we can have a look at the value chain, and we can have a look at the ultimate dairy producer, and and enable finance for that small business that in the past I think it was just harder to do. So there is an opportunity to do more, and so certainly I think when we look at trade and we look at and we're able to see that the small business that sits in South Africa or in Zambia has more trading partners, and we are able to build the data that goes with that. There's certainly a lot more financing opportunities for some of the smaller businesses. So it's just really an illustration of some of the things that, banks, I think, have got the balance sheet, but then there is not really proper enablement, or that value chain of really what's possible is not unlocked. So that's something that's very encouraging for us. And then the theme of really trade and investments, I think that is really what will be a needle mover for the continent going forward. And as I said, Fifi, I think some of the structural reforms that are underway in South Africa on electricity, on the ports, I think that is, I think if those are sustained and there's political will, I think if you mentioned leadership, it goes really a long way in providing an environment where people can be confident around the decisions that they take for the next 10 years.
Okay, Mary, I want to pick up on the point that you are making around the enabling environment, if I may. So at CNBC Africa, my employer, I have the opportunity to speak to several ministers, some of which I've already spoken to, some of which I'm looking forward to an interview with. And you speak with these ministers, Mary, and a lot of them will tell you about what they have been doing in terms of creating this enabling environment. A lot of the government officials believe that the work that they are doing to create an enabling environment is sufficient. A lot of them are in this room right now. So perhaps maybe for the purpose of their understanding and clarity, what exactly do you mean? What does an enabling environment look like for FirstRand now to play a bigger role as a lender in helping to implement rather the AFCFTA?
So maybe let me start off and say that I think, and particularly from South Africa, I think we've seen improved levels of collaboration between the private sector and the public sector. I guess the initiatives that are currently underway, one can argue that we needed some crises to get us to where we are, but we are there. And there are initiatives where there's, this joint commitment from both the government and the private sector. And I think the private sector is doing a lot to ensure that, some of those deliverables are going to take place. So energy and the rail and the transit issues being an example. And obviously we know crime and corruption is also, and safety are issues that are also quite important. So I am encouraged by the partnership. I am encouraged by the collaboration. I think there's opportunity to do more. Certainly from the private sector, we welcome any opportunity where we can lean in and I think be of assistance to, to enabling the state capacity. We know there are policy makers, so I think those lines are quite clearly well understood, but there is definitely an opportunity to do more. And I think at the top of mind, I suppose just, I think regulatory and policy certainty goes a long way. Mm-hmm. So, I think when there's agreement that this is the route and this is the path we are going, just seeing that through, and I think making sure, I think if we say that is our energy plan and that's what it looks like up until 2030, we must stay the course, because if there's something else that comes along the line, I think it causes unnecessary confusion, and I think it really impacts people's ability to invest. So policy certainty would be one. I mean, we've spoken a lot about the fact that, I guess we sit with high levels of unemployment on the continent, but we also need skills. And we need skills to be able to move around the various countries in the region. So I think, just enabling businesses that require the skills at that particular point in time to get access to the skills remains quite key. And I guess that's broader than South Africa. That's just looking really at the region. And then I think the last one is really, for me, confidence. So if you hear from the people that are in the startups, you hear about the talent that exists on the continent, all the initiatives around artificial intelligence, tech skills, those are all there. But what's not there is actually the investment to make sure that the development takes place in the country. It's quite saddening when you hear around the people that are leaving to go to Canada or that are being recruited elsewhere, where the investment has taken place to get them all skilled up, but now when they become really skilled tech people, then they leave the continent because there isn't sufficient investment coming through there. So I think, those would be the three critical ones that I would point out today, really just being just the certainty around policy, enabling the mobility of people, and I think of skills in the continent, and then just the confidence, which is, again, we live up to the promises and up to what our stakeholders require to ensure that they can put in the investment required in the continent. I mean, I think we have capital markets that require a lot of flows to come into the continent to enable us to do the work required for infrastructure development, and I think to make sure that many of the people living on the continent have access to, to a good standard of living. So I think just making sure that at any given point in time, we are really an investment case on all fronts.
Okay. I'm going to open it up to the floor, to audience members right now, and just want to solicit your views.